Old school, you're working. I remember you took me for a ride at the building. We had that at 52, and I felt like I was flying for 50 years. That was fast enough to get that going.
Yeah, like I said,
Right. Well, you were skiing at 30.
Hello. I think we're not quite done eating, but we're real close. So let's see. I had something in mind here. Let's get the right thing. Okay. We have a lot of people here today. I hope you're all having a good time. I hope you enjoyed the vote, and I know you enjoyed the presentation. At this time, we ask that you please put your cell phones in silent mode. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to extend a special thank you to the family of Gerard Rainey, many of whom are here with us today. Their generosity in allowing the Notre Dame to be displayed here is greatly appreciated. As we'll learn later, Gerard Rainey played a vital role in restoring the Duesenberg W24 engine and recreating the Notre Dame itself. Our presenter today is Dan Arena. Dan was born in Oakland, California. During World War II, his father and uncle were involved in the Gold Cup racing boats in the 30s until the advent of World War II. Anyway, when they returned from the war, they resumed building and racing unlimited hydroplanes in Detroit. Each fall, Dan's family would travel to Oakland from Detroit, where the grape harvest, as his grandfather was in the wine business, nice business. Living in two places each year continued until 1957, when he was in the 8th grade in Lafayette, California, became his home year-round. Dan completed high school in Lafayette and went on to graduate from college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Following the sale of the family business, Arena Craft, which produced pleasure boats, Dan opened a retail store, Arena Yacht Sales. There's a lot of arenas. Selling and servicing both power and sailboats at Loch Lomond Harbor in San Rafael. He remained there until 2017 when he retired. Dan has spent his entire lifetime involved with boats and to this day continues his hobby of restoring and showing the family-built recreational boats as well as family race boats. Please welcome Dan Arena.
Close enough for the mic. Thank you, Gary, for everything, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my little dog and pony show. Right up to my mouth? Okay, this might be a little bit different. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed seeing the boat and listening to the boat out there, and it was a pleasure to show it for you. I I'm going to tell the story of an engine, a 98-year-old engine that was one of a kind and revolutionized the racing industry from the right around 46 is when the boat started to wane, but in the 30s, the late 30s, it was a powerhouse and set the world's record in 1940. But that made it famous was the Notre Dame. This is not the original boat. It is a reproduction that was done by Gerard Rainey and spent the better part of the last 26 years of his life reproducing this boat on a handshake with my father and my uncle, that he put this engine that he bought from a collector, the Alan Firth collection. And he originally was going to put it in a vintage race car until one of his close friends started researching and found out that the designer, builder, and racer lived in Lafayette along with my father and made the contract and decided there's no way that the engine should go any place but in the original boat. So, Joyce, you want to stand up for a minute? This is Gerard's wife, and it's her that allows us to see the boat, and so just gracious to let me do pretty much whatever I want to do with the boat, so, at least for the time being. Along with Joyce, two of her three children are here. Leisha is the oldest, Brandon, the youngest, and the middle daughter, Julie, is living out of the country at the present time. Along at the table is my wife, Casey, my son, another Dan Arena, Joyce's sister, Joni, on the end, her husband, Ken, and their son, Adam, and then a very close friend, almost the godson of Gerard, Paul Berryman, they're also here too, and the family has been involved, and they paid a heavy price for George's his fanaticism to get this boat done. Like I said, it took 26 years of his life. I'm going to try and go, it's hard to take 100 years of history and put it into a reasonable period of time here, but I'm going to try and get the top people that really made this boat famous and put it together along with Gerard. Your storyteller tonight is me. This is me at about 5 years old. From the day I could walk and talk, there was nothing but boats in my life. I was raised with a family, an uncle and a father, and whether it's gene or environment, I had both, so there was no changing it. I did have a scent in teenage years of hot rods and a couple of Corvettes and cars, but I would go between the drag strip and the drag strip for boats in my early life, but then eventually it was all recreational and so forth. We'll start with the family of Dan Arena. This is Dan Arena, probably he's 14 years old on the front of that boat, and it's a deck monkey on Lake Merritt. And his job was to, when the boat needed to plane off around the curves or something like that, he was to jump up onto the deck with the two handles and go from side to side to keep the boat from either flipping or front. And that was his first tries in race boats. My father tells the story of Dan, who built his first boat at 12 years old, which was a rowboat. The family just lived up the street from Lake Merritt on Harrison, and this was the two boys' playground. And so at 12, Dad says that he built his first race boat. They pull apart their bicycles, they made a trailer, and they trailer it down to Lake Merritt. And his dad explains it, and he's 5 years, almost 5 years younger than Dan. So Dan is 12, you can see how young. But in the Arena family, Dan had to babysit my dad all the time, and so they were joined at the hips from early on. But anyway, he takes his rowboat, he goes out into the water, he gets about a couple hundred feet from shore, comes back to Dan and my dad and says, "This is hard work. We've got to get a motor for this boat." And that's where it started. The lower portion is one of his first race boats with outboard on it. And then you see him graduating up into outboard sea racing hydros. This, I think, was Charlie Horse in his early years. By 1946, he won the Pacific Coast Championship in inboard boats. He graduated to inboard 700 cubic inch or a little bit less. That was the limit for Gold Cup class boats, which is what is out there in the parking lot. But he graduated, well, he didn't really graduate. He missed a lot of school in the early years and had to make it up before he went on to college. But anyway, the boats continued on in his life. He wins the Pacific Coast Championship for the second year in a row and decides he wants to see what the big boys do back in Detroit. At 19 years old, he hops on a plane all by himself, goes back to the Gold Cup in Detroit, and that's where he meets Mendelssohn, the Notre Dame. When he's back there, he watches the first Notre Dame take the Gold Cup. He was fascinated with the boat, and as the story goes, he tells Herb Mendelssohn that he's going to come back the following year and he's going to challenge him for the Gold Cup. And by God, that's what he did. This picture is now a year later, where he goes back home. He builds a second Golden Gate. Grandpa's winery was Golden Gate Winery, and although Grandpa ended up helping these kids build boats and stuff like that, their father was a world-class roller skater, and in 1912 came in second to the World Championship speed skating. So newspapers and seeing his name in the sports page was really easy as he watched his boys grow up. But anyway, this picture after the race goes worldwide because Dan is driving and his best friend is Danny Foster. His son is here today. Danny, why don't you stand up? We're going to be giving a talk in January. But this is the other son of the famous highway company, and the whole family was inducted into the Racing Hall of Fame together. And the speech in January will be the boys from Oakland. But this shot is Danny Foster Sr. In the last heat of the race against Alaghi, which was an Italian boat from Italy, Count Rossi of Martini and Rossi fame, $1 million, $2 million boat that they're racing against. In the last heat, the linkage breaks in the boat. Dan Foster climbs up onto the deck of the boat, grabs the broken linkage in his hand and holds it together while his buddy Danny drives the boat, holds his belt to keep him from going into the water for the last 4 or 5 laps of the race. They end up coming in second for the Gold Cup. The crowd was over 100,000 people, and every paper in the country and even over in Europe picked up this shot of these two young little 20-year-old kids with their home-built boat races against the fastest and most expensive boats in the world. So that's where it started. We're going to go along now from the family and trace the engine's life. The top picture is Horace Dodge Jr. He was the one that contracted to build the Duesenberg for his Gold Cup class boats. His father dies of the Dodge brothers. His father dies in 23, and as the rumor goes, the family didn't want him to get into the car business, so his mother, Ann, gave him $2 million to go play with boats. He starts Dodge Motor Boat Company, which actually turned out to be a fine company. They built some beautiful boats and boat pleasure, but the whole purpose was that he wanted to race boats. He had some great designers, and his sister also was involved, which they continued to run the company together. he has the fetish for the Gold Cup, so he goes to the Duesenberg brothers and contracts them to build the finest and most powerful raceboat engine known to man. The contract that he signed in 1926 was for $32,500 in 1926 for 2 engines and enough parts for a third. Big money. And that's what he did. The second gentleman down below is Herb Mendelson, that ends up with the boat in 1935 after the frustration that Horace Dodge has never been able to get the boat to run correctly. And it's Mendelson, who is an investment broker type of deal, the largest stockholder in GM, and it was credited for putting the whole company together that formed General Motors from the very beginning. Very wealthy and just wonderful man, as my parents used to say. Here is a couple of his boats. You see the one that's out there now in the upper right. But the first boat that was a Dodge boat when he took over the company is there. And then his daughter Shirley, in the 60s, ended up putting a Notre Dame in the water, actually several of them, and continued to race, but never came to the prominence of what the Notre Dame was in the step hydro. This is Gerard. This is 1990, and the gentleman that found the engine and bought it, and then his close friend Alex Giamo, who rented space next to his shop and did Babbitt bearings. I'm sure some of you might have heard of him, and he was very much in antique cars and antique races, and he was the history buff. He was the one that researched, found Dad and Dan, and the story starts about putting it in an engine. So again, remember this shot, this is 1990. Gerard's early life was racing cars. He was an engine guy. Started out in Porsches and then went into Dan Gurney race cars, Formula 5000? Yeah, Formula 5000 races. That car is sitting in one of his shops in the family home, hanging up on the wall, a beautiful piece of woodwork. And as I understand, there's 2 other race cars sitting in a shack outside the house in parts. But anyway. Parts, yes, right, not cars, they're just parts of cars. So, and he also had a dyno, local dyno in San Carlos. The other more notable people, and there's so many people that were involved in this boat, I'm only picking the people that really made the difference. Okay, let's get to the point here. This is my dad sitting on the far left. This is Joe Mendelson, the son of Herb. During the Notre Dame first years, he was about 12 years old and related the stories of how it was living with the family, and his sister that ended up racing. Next to him is the world favorite, E.K. Muller, engine builder, designer, and was the real brains behind getting that engine from 400 horsepower to 1,000 horsepower, and we'll go on. The gentleman in the center is a moderator, author. Ed Muller is his name, and he's an author in his story, and he monitors this panel in '94 where Gerard and Alex brought all of the people into town to tell their story, and then my Uncle Dan, and then that is but he was the boat builder and worked for Dan for many years. He was pretty famous. He was model builder, woodworker, and could build just about anything that you can imagine. And I'll think of his name as it comes to me later on. So we're going to start 1923. This is when, to 1924, this is when Dodge goes to the the builder on the engine. Now this is 1917 to 1930 Napier V 12-cylinder engine, and it was made in England, and we're pretty sure it's a W12, and we're pretty sure the Duesenberg brothers used that as a basis to put their engine together. And Paul Miller was the one that told us the story that he thought. 1927, Paul Miller starts to work at the Duesenberg factory in the car division. But the race boat and the Duesenberg was right across the street. And over the next year or so, he's keeps running over there and trying to help them get this engine running together. This is the first generation of the Duesenberg. You see the 3 water exhaust manifolds. Carburation is 6 updraft carburetors, 1 carburetor for each of the 4-cylinder banks that ran. The boat just never ran. They had a hard time getting the fuel to the cylinders, and a disaster. As the time goes on, you can see the top. They went from 6 downdraft carburetors on the boat to 12 Zenith carburetors, and then eventually went to 12 Holly carburetors, each time doing a little bit better in performance, but still it was just unpredictable engine. The lower versions, you see Horace Dodge working on one of the boats, what it looks like with the 12 carburetors on it, trying to figure out how to make this thing go. By 1929, Buller is full-time over at the speed shop and working on the engine. He changes the distributors to magnetos, Delco magnetos, Delco distributors to Bosch magnetos. He changes the cylinder heads from steel to aluminum, and the connecting rods from tube to I-beam are just some of the things that he did. This engine is a little bit out of sequence, but this shows you the engine with Muller's first adaptation of the supercharger. It has 2 two-barrel carburetors on it, and that's when the engine started to work. A side note to that on that supercharger there, we always thought until about a year ago that Mendelssohn was the one through GM that actually got the supercharger from GM and worked on it. But actually, about a year ago, a young boy from McPhail College in Kansas City called me up, and he was going through the archives of this college, which is the only college that gives a 4-year degree in auto restoration. And he had run across a bunch of blueprints from 1920 to 1930 that was donated by the grandson of Augie Duesenberg. Well, he finds out that he gets 60 some odd blueprints of all of the original drawings of the Duesenberg engine, full size, and you can see 2 of them right there that we were given. He makes digitized copies of the deal and sends them all out to us. But in that group, we find from 1933 that Miller was designing an engine for Duesenberg to put on the W24, but by then Duesenberg was just fed up with. Horace Dodge was just fed up with the engine and went on to other things. In 1931, he put one of the engines in a boat, and it didn't last 3 laps. 1932, he puts in 2 boats in the Gold Cup. The Duesenberg never goes more than 3 laps. So 1933, still the Depression going on. He enters 5 boats in the Gold Cup, with 2 of them being Duesenberg engines. One of the Duesenberg engines never gets off the trailer into the water. The other Duesenberg power boat didn't do, again, more than 2 or 3 heats, and it failed. So you can see over 7 years he had just gotten frustrated with the engine. He never paid the Duesenberg brothers to throw them out. I understand that he stiffed them for about $2,000 of the 35. But anyway, that was the story of the engine. I'm showing you a couple pictures here, still Dodge boats. He had some good designers and boat builders at his time. He was a very, very wealthy man. He had, I think, 5 wives. He was quite a playboy, and several mansions, and just enjoyed life to the fullest. This one is the only boat that he built that had the engine in front of the boat, which is like the Notre Dame sitting outside. All of the rest of the boats were rear engine boats. This is the last adaptation Dodge had, and was one of the engines that went in the 33 race. And you can see the exhaust pipes. Muller had decided to change, get rid of the water exhaust and go to direct exhaust out of the engine. This is the boat that Dodge sold. This was Dolphin 9. Dolphin was his sister's name and was in Dodge Motor Company. She actually drove some of the Gold Cup class boats in the races when they were entering 5 boats at a time. You can see the stacks coming out of there. And we're pretty sure that he only sold 1 engine and a bunch of parts. We're not quite sure what happened to the other engine. Okay, 1934 to 1946, this is when Mendelssohn takes over. Here's a shot of the Duesenberg engine after GM goes through you can, just let me go back here. Okay, you can, darn it, there. This is the 4-barrel carburetor that went on in the last generation, and you see the stacks as you see today were designed by Paul Muller. And this was the engine, pretty much the way it said from now on in the racing situation. That supercharger ended up being the prototype and went on the Allison airplane engines as we went into the war. And one of Muller's other contributions to the war effort is that he built 671 car for the Army that had the 671 blower that we all use in our boats and cars and stuff like that. I have one on one of my race boats at the present time. So Muller was a genius, ended up working on Indy cars and had a very just prominent life in the Detroit area. This shows the first Notre Dame that hadn't changed the stacks yet, and a shot up there running. The boat does pretty good the first year, but doesn't win anything. The next year, it goes back, and that's when Dan met Mendelssohn. And when I told you that he flew back for the Gold Cup, he meets him and then comes back to race them at the Gold Cup the following year, 38. But what happens is, Carl Perry right there, that was the driver and that won the Gold Cup, he decides to build a brand new boat for the next Gold Cup to defend the race. And Dan, with his new boat, is where they run. In the testing and qualifying for the race, this boat loses control, flips over, and is almost completely destroyed. Not quite. But Carl Perry is seriously hurt, is in the hospital for months and months, and eventually recovers and goes on. But Mendelssohn was heartbroken and done. The Mendelssohn, after seeing Dan and Danny Foster and the 2 boys from Oakland that did such a show, Dan takes his Golden Gate back home to fame and newspapers and stuff like that after coming in second for the Gold Cup. Mendelssohn gives him a call and says, Dan, can you come out and take a look at my broken boat and see what you can do? I'd like you to try and drive it. 20 years old, Dan gets on a plane and goes back. And Mendelssohn had paid him more money than Dan had ever seen before. And this becomes the first contract that he ended up building boats or designing for anybody else other than himself. There's a little bit of family history there, where because he was supposed to come home and continue on in the wine industry, being the oldest and of the thing. And Dan says, I'm going back. I want to work with that Duesenberg engine, and so he does. In the article here is when he goes back, he's redesigning. It tells here that he's redesigning the rudder and making changes on the boat. And the first time they put it in the water, there's press all over the place to see this young boy put it through his paces. He comes back to the press, and in the article it says, this boat has beans. This boat has, what he says, my boat wide open, this boat has more beans on half throttle than my boat ever had, and they quoted it in the newspaper. He goes on to set some records with the boats, doesn't win any major trophies, which is the Gold Cup, Silver Cup, and President's Cup, which are the two part. The Gold Cup started in 1904 and to this day still goes. One of the longest continuous trophies in racing history. He continues to run the boat, drive the boat, but it's still very dangerous. It's hard to ride, and he can't take advantage of the real power that the Duesenberg now is running, close to 1,000 horsepower. And it's all he can do to keep it on the water, but still makes some good showings with the boat. You can see the boat in the rear. And he doesn't win anything major, but he does come second, third place, and he's a contender. This is one of the last shots of the boat before a race, when Dan goes to Mendelssohn and says, listen, if you want to win races, let me build you a boat. Dan was hoping that he could build a 3-point like his first Golden Gate, but Mendelssohn said, no, I want a traditional boat. Can you build me a traditional boat? And Dan was given, had a budget of $50,000 just to build a hull. Remember, they had the gauges and all of the other stuff from the first Notre Dame. One of the big reasons that you see the boat out there in the parking lot was because, okay, now Walter Smith, that was the name that I forgot. Dan was all along while racing was getting his naval architecture degree from Forest Lawn in New Jersey through correspondence, and then when he could, he would go to classes over there. When he started to build the boat, he had done some drawings, and by October there of 28, I believe, no, 39. Walt makes a daily diary of everything that is being done on the boat. And when I say everything, every screw, nut, bolt, size of wood, carved pattern from Dan's design. And his handwritten is over 40 some odd pages that they had. When we went back for that little show in '94, this was the thing that made the building of the boat so easy for Gerard to start on. This is a picture. This is Dan, Herb Mendelssohn, and Kodard was the mechanic for the engine, and he would try. I'll think of his name in just a minute, but he is the one that was responsible for keeping the engine running all the time. By 1940, when the boat is run, it pretty much breaks every record on the course with the new boat. You can see it here. It sets the world's record for Gold Cup class as 100 miles an hour. Sets the heat record of 2.5 mile, 15 mile, and 30 mile. And all told from the races, there's about 22 records that were set by that boat through the 1940s. As in 1940, you realize World War II was in Europe, was starting to get pretty hostile. And so in 41, all racing was shut down in the Detroit area, and Dan had put the boat into storage while GM and stuff started to go in the Lend-Lease program with Italy, and they were pretty sure that they were going to be involved in the war one way or the other, in at least supplying stuff. So no racing. The war goes on. My father becomes a pilot in the water, is an Air Force pilot. Dan, because of his naval architects, goes to New York and is in the ship design building for troop sandports and redesign troop ships during the war. After the war is over, all Dan could think about is new boats and building another race boat. The two brothers contact each other. My father, Gene, tells Dan about this wonderful engine that he's flying with, the Allison, and wouldn't it be great if they could put one in a boat? They get back. Dan is already started by the time Dad gets out, building a new boat. Grandpa ends up financing and buying a brand new P-38 night fighter. They couldn't find any engines right after the war that were available, so they fly the plane into Concord, jump the plane, and take the two engines out to put into the boat. They bought that brand new P-38 night fighter for $1,750. They continued to buy engines in their racing career later on, and we'll handle more with Danny Foster. But they were buying brand new crated Allison engines between $15 and $25 a piece. They could change engines faster than they could change spark plugs. Okay, Dan goes back, and by the way, that boat, when you were watching the pictures earlier on in this morning here of that race, that is Golden Gate 3, the first time an Allison powerboat racing. It set 5 major records, but he broke an oil line at the last heat again, filled the boat up with oil, and ran the boat for about 6 laps with no engine oil, until he finally, on the last lap, a piston went through the side of the block, and he didn't finish the race. But again, it set the standards from then on of Allison's taking over the racing engine. After that race, Mendelson comes back to Dad and Dan and said, "Hey, we've got a boat sitting in the yard on the Clinton River. Can you guys get it back running?" Again, money talks. They had broken their boat, and so they sell the Golden Gate 2, and they start working for Mendelson again. They pull the engine out, go through it, and completely go through the boat for the next year's running. You're right here, my father. This is Bert McKenzie, who was the driver in the Notre Dame in the pre-war. And then this is Schmidt, Dan's boat builder, and all around, just whatever needed to be done, he was the one that made it work. During the 6 years that the boat sits in that storage on the Clinton River, you can see the river is underneath the building. The boat warps. It gets a twist in the hull from the moisture and the years of sitting, and the boat doesn't handle as nice as it did before, and Dan and Dad couldn't get over 5,000 RPM on the engine where it used to run at 55. But still, the boat was a beauty to run, and Dan was used to driving prickly boats. They went on, they were very successful in a number of the races, did not win the Gold Cup. They had a gas tank that blew apart, and Allisons were now in the boat. Here's Dad, Dan, and Mendelson looking at the boat just after a race and deciding what they can do. This is the only color shot of the Notre Dame that the family ever got. And again, it came in from 94 from E.K. Muller's wife that ended up going through the archives when they were looking for information on the building of the boat for Gerard. And this college shot came up. And again, this is Dad and my dad and Dan sitting on the boat before a race. The boat continues to run, is still a mainstay in the racing field and a crowd pleaser. The engine is just so unique in its sound and always had a following for the boat. It was a little bit rougher riding with the twist in the boat, but continued on. One of the last races of the season, the Gold Cup, again, one of the more prestigious one, Dan and Dad win. As a note to this, this was the last World War II engine to ever win a major race, and goes down in the history book as the last engine. Here's Dad, Dan, and Mendelssohn receiving the Silver Cup for 1947. 1948 to 1990. The boat is not going to be a winner in any way. Mendelssohn leases it out the boat for a year, and they run with the Duesenberg, but they can't handle it. And they came in third on one race and fourth on another. So Shayneth buys the boat from Mendelssohn and goes to Dan and Dad and says, "Can you put an Allison in the Notre Dame?" Dan says, "I can do anything you want as long as you pay the bill." And so they took the Notre Dame back to the shop. Now Dan and Dad are in business for themselves. They started a boat company, and all Dan wanted to do was design 3-point hydroplanes. But he always was looking for money, so he took on the project. He also did the same thing with the Tempo, Guy Lombardo's boat. He stretched that and put an Allison in Guy Lombardo's boat. But here you see the Shayneth, Lee Shayneth, sitting there with the Allison in it. They had cut it in half, extended it 3 feet. I like this picture here. You can see the Notre Dame in the bottom there. This is about 53, 54 at one of the races. I don't know where it is, and I don't know what yard the boats were being stored before the race. But of the 8 unlimited hydroplanes that you see in this picture, besides the Notre Dame, which is now Miss Wayne, 5 of the 9 boats are all designed and built by Dan Arena in his company. Jump forward after, and one more statistic on the Notre Dame here. This boat continues to run, although it travels from owner to owner, all the way until 1958. That boat is still racing. Never won any major races, but was always in a hunt. And so you figured that a boat that was built 20 years before and had 13 racing seasons under his belt, completely unthinkable in today's racings, where they'll build a new boat just every year or two to come up to date. So it was tried tradition. What happened to the boat was that they knew they wanted to keep it for prosperity, and they pulled all of the equipment off and put the boat in the side of one of Gale's yards, and the boat ends up getting burned up by accident. A yard guy saw a boat over there, and he was building burning up some other old boats, and ended up, so the boat was completely stormed. Everybody was heartbroken at the boat. All why Gerard has become such a hero to me. Let's fast forward to about 1985. The Duesenberg engine floats all over the place. We don't really know. There was the engine spent 2 years in Dan's shop when he pulled it out of the Notre Dame, and he wasn't interested in the engine because he was buying engines at $25 a piece. So it wasn't worth it to him, and it was one of the biggest regrets that he had in later life. But the engine floats around, it goes to the museum. One of the engines that is, I think the Gubby engine, ends up in the Dodge museum or down in one of his warehouses for a while. And then the engine ends up in Clayton, New York, the Race Boat Museum, and was in one of Dodge's boat on display, and somebody wanted to buy the boat but not the engine, and so we figured that it got split up there and ended up in Alan Firth's collection. But you see it there on a trailer, and what they would do is they would drive it to different events and fire the engine up on the engine stand. They would go to fairs and just any place for the unique. It always was a crowd pleaser, but nobody repaired or did anything to it, and towards the end it was in pretty sad shape. Okay, 1990 to 1908, Gerard gets the boat and starts his project. We have, through the family, hundreds and hundreds of pictures of the boat. My grandmother, with her 2 sons, kept all the newspaper articles. I have albums of newspaper articles, pictures of all of the boats they built. But a tremendous amount between the families of Schmidt and Paul Miller. This is Dan when he meets Gerard, and Gerard says, if you help me get started, I will put the engine back in your boat. How hard could it be? That would end up coming back to him many times in the next 26 years. But Dan and Gerard worked together until '94 when they have the big event in Alex Giamo ends up going after a lot more parts for the engine, tracing it out and trying to make sure that they have everything possible that was ever built for there. And Gerard continued to write checks to facilitate all the parts. This is a picture that I enjoy, and the fact that if you saw the little aluminum struts in the boat, if you happen to peek down into the construction, there are 40 aluminum struts, and Gerard made from Dan's drawings all of the different pieces. I think there was about 8 different configurations, and sand casted every single one of them by hand in a sand casting, just the way that it was done by Dan in the original thing. I mean, his attention to detail, Gerard was just an amazing guy. This is back in '94. Again, Dan, my father, and this is Shirley, their younger sister, about 7 years younger than my dad, and then another picture of the boys during the interview. The reason Shirley is there is that she films the 3-day event. There is probably 25 hours of all of the talking of Mendelssohn, son, Schmidt, and Miller, telling their life stories. Besides Ed Muller, there is a number of different designers that were all invited to the weekend. What was it? Griffin Morganson from France came over, a famous book author and historian for engines all over the world. He came out to see what was going on. Word spread pretty fast as they realized that somebody was doing something with the Duesenberg. This is a picture from 1939 of the construction of the boat back in Clayton. Again, on top of the water, there's water underneath the shop there. And then this is the present day, 1994. You can see that the boat is an exact replica in every way as Gerard goes through the journal building the boat. The Saturday night banquet dinner was at the candy store that I'm sure that you're all familiar with. And Joyce, what was there? 60 people? About 60 people from all over were involved. Howard Arneson and race car drivers and friends from Gerard's racing group that came in there. And it was a beautiful banquet. You all know the scene there at the candy store. And here you can see the prime candidates all being honored there. They had showed movies in 16 millimeter of some of the early racing of the boat, and it was one of the finest parties and get-together that ever was. Gerard moves the shop to a bigger shop later on, and he puts the deck on the boat. You see my father there signing the drawings, the full offset drawings of the boat that Gerard had worked on as he builds the boat. Here it is at the new shop, and the skin is on, and we put the first sealer coat on the boat before we flip it over. Here's a shot of the boat in 1939 again, and the way it was finished, you can see, you can see all of these castings that were done in 1939, and then you come back and you see the exact same thing. Gerard followed everything meticulous. This boat is much of a clone that any replica could ever be. This shows the boat finished, the deck on it. There. This is where the journal stops. Gerard has no give-me's to building the boats. I remember talking to him years before when my father had finally passed away, and I was making as many trips occasionally over there as I could sneak away from my business. And I'd asked Gerard, I said, Gerard, you have had that engine there for close to 15 years and you haven't touched it. You cleaned it up, you looked at it, you put the old stacks of Muller on there, but don't you think that you should find out about the boat? And he said to me, Dan, the engine is the last thing I'm concerned about. I will get that engine running no matter what. He had not looked at it until 2008. In 2014, for the next 5 years, he does. He tears apart the engine meticulously. You can see the rods there along the thing. It's just a work of art. It's beautiful when you see it in the boat, but when you see it apart, there was somebody that came up there and asked me why there was 30 stacks for a 24-cylinder boat. Well, this is the reason. Each one of the 4-cylinder engines has a slave exhaust that brings these two insides together. So that is how we ended up with 30 exhausts. This is the crank has 5 main bearings. And again, it is just beautiful. There'll be several shots of the engine as the years goes by, and he slowly puts the engine together. And he was an artist. I thought when I saw him doing woodwork, he was unbelievable. But then when I watched him with this engine in his shop, like I said, he had a dyno, and engines was his real fetish. See the engine as it slowly gets back together. A shot of early on that you saw of the timing gears as a 6 camshafts, full-length camshafts from all 8 cylinders, and the 3 magnetos and the 96 valves. 08, the engine goes on Gerard's dyno at the shop. And let me tell you, what a thrill when I first heard that engine, and also with John. Danny Foster was also with me. This was one of the big events that we all look forward to listen to that on the dyno. At 5,000 RPM, it developed 917 horsepower. 2014 to 2016, the engine gets into the boat. And now Gerard has to go through the drawings and all of the pictures to get the rudders, the shafts, and start hooking up the boat. One of his roommates that he rents space to next door to him at the shop is a gentleman that works on vintage race cars and makes aluminum cowlings and so forth like that, and has all of the wheels for working. And he helped Gerard fabricate all of the cowlings from pictures of the boat that he had digitized and scaled and stuff like that. Again, exact duplicates. You can see here some of the parts that had been accumulated, extra blocks, front covers, heads, intake manifolds. We even have some of the original exhaust water manifolds that we accumulated in the years. You can see in the upper right there, the forms that made the aluminum cowlings for the boat. Gerard made all of those forms from scale and then fabricated the aluminum housing. These are all of the parts that, and bright work, again, we didn't have anything for the boat, that he scaled down and built himself. He welded, polished. There was a number of questions on the water pickups and how big they were, and it would slow the boat down. Well, it probably did, but they needed to get water to that engine. And so everything was built exactly the way Dan designed it in 1939. 2016, 2018. There's a big race boat show up in Tahoe. Danny Foster's wife is president of the Antique Boat Association and begs Gerard to bring the boat up to the show. The engine is running, it's in the boat, and the cowlings have just been painted and stuff. So graciously, Gerard said, okay, and we take the boat with the original frames that were built to hold the boat for the 20-some odd years, and put it on one of my flatbed trailers, and we trailer the boat up to Tahoe for the show. Again, as you all probably saw, the sound and the people couldn't believe the sound of the engine and how gorgeous the boat was, and it was a real crowd pleaser. And Barbara Foster was just tickled pink the whole time of the show because she took all the credit. This is the poster for the show, and this was Dan and Dad in one of their races in 1947. That was the poster for the show, and the theme was, ladies and gentlemen, you have a race. And although the boat didn't get into the water, it was the talk of the show. 2 years later, the boat is finally finished. There's a show up in Clear Lake. It's called Wooden Glory. And again, with pressure from the family, because we didn't know where we were going to run the boat, but we had a lot of control with the people at Clear Lake and talking to the sheriffs and stuff like that we could put a race boat on the water. And so you can see the whole family came up for it as we put the boat, Gerard and myself, as we backed the boat into the water for the very first time. And let me tell you, the adrenaline that I was feeling at that time was insurmountable. Fire up the engine for the first time to make everything is a go, and then here we are. We're looking at all of the gauges. It's still in neutral, and do we want to do this or not? And Gerard sitting there. Now you might ask, well, why isn't Gerard running? Well, I assumed that Gerard, after 26 years of his life, would want to be so excited to get into the boat. And actually, I didn't know that he had planned all along. I guess I told Joyce that he wasn't driving the boat. He didn't know what in the heck one end of a boat was from another as far as driving it. And his main concern was that engine. That engine was his love and life. And he says, you're driving the boat, I'm watching my engine. And so that's where we head off. And we idle around a little bit looking for leaks and engines and engine oil and heating and so forth like that, and slowly but surely start to take it up to speed. And again, reiterating, I can't tell you the exhilaration that I felt. I could tell from the smile on Gerard's face that he was pretty damn happy too, but that day was almost 70 years to the day that my father and uncle turned that engine off for the last time as they pulled the engine out of the original boat. Here we are coming in after a run, and you have two very happy captains there. We couldn't get it up to full speed. We were running lean on the engine. We had some carburation that needed to be adjusted, and we started the leak at the stuffing box for the rudder, and so water was starting to come in. So we had about 25 minutes on the water and so forth like that. And then, unfortunately, 4 months later, Gerard passes away. This was his only ride. It was devastating to me, and I'm sure all of the family and so forth like that. The Rainey family has graciously said that, they want the boat and the tribute to Gerard to be shown, and that if I could spearhead it, I could call the shots. And to this very day, I'm grateful to the family for what I've been able to do. We end up taking the boat to Tahoe and showing it up there for the race boat type deal. This is Danny Foster and me making sure that there was no links or anything as we run it in the show. The show, it won the best engine of the show, a big award. And naturally, we were excited. This is me. If I could just sleep in the boat, that's the position I would be in for most of my life. And Joyce, whenever I was down working on the boat in San Carlos and stuff like that, a couple of times I spent the night because we had to leave early in the morning to take it to Tahoe or some of the shows that we went to. We went to Washington, up to Washington with the boat and ran it at a vintage race. And I kept telling Joyce, "Oh, Joyce, I just get out of the boat and I go to sleep. I'm happy as can be." Okay, that pretty much goes, but I want to give a little plug for Danny Foster in January, where he's going to head the talk of us on the boys from Oakland. In the background here, you see the the Miss US. It set the world's record in 1962 of 200 miles an hour and was designed by Dan. This is the Hall of Fame ceremony in '94, Danny Foster. This is Roy Drury, the driver of the boat at 200 miles an hour, my father and my uncle. And I lose names so fast.
I'm not sure.
But anyway, I know his wife is speaking. But anyway,
Shane?
no. I'll come up with it. So anyway, the story of these three boys from Oakland and what they did, along with many other people, they set Detroit on fire and were icons in the boat building business and had many record holders of the two fine. Danny Foster was a prolific driver, won the Gold Cup, I think, 2 times, Silver Cup, President's Cup. And when we left the Notre Dame, when we left the Golden Gate 3, after blowing up the engine, we sold it to Al Fallon, and he renamed it Miss Great Lakes. We left Danny Foster there to drive the boat, and Dad and Dan went back home. So Danny continued his racing careers in Detroit for most of his time, but we'll go over that later. If you have any questions, I know I've kept you a long time as I stumble through all of this, and then there's a lot of people that I've neglected to tell you about that played a major portion along with the family on the boat. But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take anything for those who want to stick around. Yes?
Were you running it out front circulating water?
No, we weren't. There's brass water pumps in the engine. You notice that I was watching temperature and oil pressure and stuff like that. We can only run it for short periods of time. Really shouldn't but you can't get water to the boat and the crowds, and people need to hear that boat. Yes, in the back. Pardon? You know, I don't know who did it. When Paul redesigned the whole engine, the firing order, he designed the cams shooting. But I don't know, over the period of time and the years, a lot had changed. You know. Yeah, these were the original cams. They were reground to the specs, but they're the original cams that Gerard got with the boat. Yes. Pardon? In Anchor. Well, that's if the Rainey families continue to let me drive the boat. And I'm sure Brandon is eager to get into the boat, and so we'll start transitioning him into it. But the boat is going to, I did a little bit of damage to the boat up in Clear Lake 3 weeks ago. We've got to go back, and we have a persistent problem with the rudder. Just an awful lot of pressure on it pulls the boat through, so we're going to redesign that a little bit. It will definitely be a test and tune next year. I don't foresee it going in the water anytime this year, but that could change. But right now, a test and tune would be the first race. I'd go to Tom. The one thing that the family all knows for me is that the boat needs to go back to Detroit. The boat never raced on the West Coast. It was, Seattle knew about it and stuff like that, but it never came east. The fame, and I get calls all the time from any of the major races, Gold Cup, Silver Cup, San Diego. Can you bring the boat there? It needs to be shown. That's the whole purpose that we want to do as a tribute to my family and the Gerard family. But we'll see. We'll keep it for going for as long as we can. Excuse me, my mind just came back into focus, and this is George Simons. He's the owner of the boat, and Dan built the boat for him. To this day, no piston run boat has ever gone faster than the 201 mile an hour that was set in 1962. The record's been broken by several jet engines, but it's never been beat.
Dan, come back here. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So great to have the boat. We're so grateful you signed up. Thank you, the Rainey family. Thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Looking well. Okay.
Yeah, gotta stay off.
Yeah.
How you doing? Okay. You look great? Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I saw you hugging all the time. All right, buddy, get registered. It's spectacular. Isn't that cool? Yeah. I was already shutting the cars out of that table. Nobody asked for anyone to stood up. That big table. Yeah, that was awesome.
So we're getting back to
The night before or something, right?
If we come up, if I bring on the party, I need to re-register for the park though, or?
Yeah, so I can get you in. Because by then, depends on what time you get this.
You can't get by me,
If
girl.
you're there in the morning, I can get you in the problem. But if you get,
Oh, it's so good to see you. I hadn't seen you in a long.
You have a lot of cars.
when do you, how
I
long
saw that guy before, you know. I ran into him somewhere. Yeah.
why don't you touch base with me before you leave, and I'll let you know how we're doing.
I think the first time I
It should be fine. They should be able to work.
Take care.
Thanks for the loan. Anyway, right?
That or something else.
No, that was you. How do you like it?
So, but I don't want to bring.
You don't want to bring it in. I'll save you. Okay. Touch base with me before you leave.
Yeah, I gave you her phone number, right? So just call her. Because I don't know, I don't have his number either. And I'll return that. Was she a good friend of these people? Yeah, they're clients for years. So when he got sick, he might have died. I mean, you call my call Bart.
Good to see you.
All right, buddy, I got to take Jack home. Okay. See you.
Hey, Gillette, you want me to bring the stuff with her? Yeah, I can't.
So they mentioned the candy shop. I did a presentation.
And they got another one, I think, there's a couple of weekends.
They had the world's fastest road, open up